Thanks for joining us on this behind the scenes kind of exclusive look on No Roses, the making of the score. With me, I've got John Henry Phillips, the main character of the film and also one of the producers, and Alex Redfern, extraordinary composer. Hi, guys.
Hey.
Hello.
Cool. Thanks for doing this. So for those listening, we've got a bit of a special treat. We're going to actually drop two of the tracks from the score. It's an incredible album, an amazing score, if I say so myself, even though I didn't score it. And they'll be available exclusively on Go Button Media's YouTube channel. So if you search Go Button Media, you'll find it. They'll be available for a short time. Two of the tracks that we're actually going to play today. Also, if you go to John's Instagram, which is Battlefield Archaeologist, you'll find that. All right. So I wanted to talk to you a bit, Alex, about first time you heard about the project. What crossed your mind? What did you think?
Yeah, so we spoke pretty early on. I think the first time we spoke, filming hadn't even finished. So I hadn't seen any scenes, but I'd heard from John and you roughly what the story was. So we talked early on, and we instantly sort of connected over our favorite scores to war movies like Saving Private Ryan, Band of Brothers, all of those good stuff. So we knew we wanted to incorporate some of that sort of grandeur and emotion from these amazing scores. Obviously we're doing a documentary, so we probably can't go all out all the way through, but we felt like we could put it in there somewhere. I mean, that sort of music is some of my favorite film music, so any sort of chance to write music like that, I'm gonna jump on it instantly. Initially we wanted to, I wanted to sort of mostly do orchestra. As we went on, we kind of realized there'd be a little bit more synth and guitar in there and stuff like that. Initially, I think we had the idea of using tons of a male choir just to represent the voices of all of the sort of sailors involved in World War II, and as we worked, we brought that back a little bit, but there is a bit of choir in there still. I think it's a cool addition. So.
Neat. Yeah, I remember the first time we started talking about. I guess it's the only way I can, as a director, communicate with a composer is I usually throw out other scores or other movies or other tracks or music that I've heard. And it was kind of funny how instantly, I mean, obviously as a composer, you would know them, but it was kind of interesting. Oh yeah, Hans Zimmer. Oh yeah. James Horner. Very cool. And John, you know, maybe for people that don't know or haven't followed that particular part of your life, maybe, you've got a music background, maybe chat about that a little bit and how you got to know Alex, because you introduced us and brought him on the film early on, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I started playing guitar when I was about 7 or something like that, and then carried that right on. And then me and Alex met, I guess we were probably about 16, 17, something like that.
Maybe not even that.
No, we were really young, and because we lived not too one village over from each other or something, and his band needed a bassist to fill in on a couple of gigs, and so I did it, and we used to rehearse in his house, and it was emo band, wasn't it?
Yeah. Good music. Good music.
But so then after that, we did that for a little while, and then I carried on playing in bands and had very moderate success, but we did it for a few years and that sort of thing. And then Alex, I guess, went off and learned how to compose all this amazing music, and we lost touch for a long time, really. But it was. I remember seeing a video that Alex had done with a full orchestra, and obviously the last thing that we did together was just a few emo songs in a living room. So when I saw that, it was obviously like, oh my god, what's he been doing? So I think back then, I think anyone that starts a band envies people that can kind of write full musical scores, and I think everyone kind of has that in the back of their head as a thing they could maybe try and go into, but it's obviously you have to be absolutely amazing at it. So Alex was just the one that did it, I suppose, out of everyone that dreams of it and thinks about it. And
I remember thinking about it. I mean, this isn't the first time I've worked with a composer, but I always find that beginning part is really either rough or magical. And even if it's rough, it can turn out great. There's been composers I've worked with on shows that are like, we just couldn't understand each other from the beginning. But for someone like me who's primarily visually driven, and I have, I have a couple guitars that are probably rusting in the back. I have a basic ability to play chords, but I have no knowledge of how to even remotely begin to score. And I think anybody, part of the reason I think we're doing this, I think anybody that has made a film or watches a lot of movies, if you're not a composer or a real musician, I think the writing of a score for a film is somewhat mystical. It's, I didn't even have the word for it. Like, it's just, where do you start, right? Like, where do you start? Now, obviously for a composer, you're like, right, well, here's where I start. And maybe I'll ask you that. But I think for all of us in the visual realm, you'd be like, okay, well, I'm going to need a camera. I'm going to need some people. I'm going to need to start putting this thing together. And then it appears really quickly on the screen, even when you're doing it. So you can start to navigate it and go yes or no. And here's where we're going. But I'd love to know what a composer's mind sort of, how does it kick in the first time you start to see visuals, like when we sent you that trailer?
Yeah, I mean, like, it's tough. Like, I struggle writing music when there's no picture. I normally need some sort of visual stimulus just to get the ideas down. But when I am working to video, a lot of the time it can score itself. You just need to know exactly what the film is saying, what the picture is saying, and then sometimes it just comes. Other times you've got to like really sort of craft it, and it's a lot of sort of like kind of maths involved. It's not really maths, but like there kind of is maths involved, because you've got to sort of like construct it rather than sort of like artistically create it, I guess. And both of those sort of techniques happened within this film. There were some days where I just couldn't get anything down, and I knew, well, we've got a deadline, so I've got to write something. So I kind of constructed it. But then there are other days where it came like really naturally to me, and I think that I'd like some of my favorite tracks from this movie are from both cases. So yeah, it's kind of interesting how it does that. Sometimes the inspiration can hit you, and other days it just does not come, but you've got to make the music anyway. So yeah.
I do remember, I don't know if John even knows this, so this will be new information for him, but I do remember right towards that deadline, because we only finished the film a few months ago. And I do remember one conversation with you where you were like, I think I'm writing like 10 minutes of music a day, but I'm just stuck on this. But yeah, I promise you I'm going to get it. And it feels so strange hearing a composer beg for more time, because you're like, God, I would give you all the time in the world. The music is beautiful. But yeah, no, that's really interesting that you say that sometimes it just comes to you. And I'm wondering if now might be a good time for us to all hear like that first piece of music you ever wrote for this film. I think even John, you didn't really hear it until recently, right?
I didn't hear it until we discussed having this actual chat. So
yeah, so I'm actually curious because John's seen the movie a lot of times. So I'm going to play the track, but then I'd love to hear from John first. Like, John, if it sounds, what's the difference that you detect between this track and when you saw the film? I'm really curious what you think. So I'm just going to play it now. Hang on, and here we go. still gives me goosebumps when I hear it, like the first time out. John, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. The only thing I could really comment on it, I suppose, is the fact that I can't believe that's an actual demo of like that's the first draft of something. I mean, normally, when you're in a band and stuff, a demo is kind of like a voice note on your phone that you kind of hum a melody into. So for that to be a demo is pretty outrageous, really. Yeah. In terms of it being different, I mean, I'm not sure, to be honest.
There was more instruments in the final version. But yeah, I think I sped it up a little bit. That's the slowest bit of music I've ever written. I think it's about
Really?
50
first here
beats per minute or something. So it's like really slow. I don't know why I wrote it slow, but yeah, this is just the same as what I was saying. Like, this is a piece that came super organically to me. We were going to have a meeting, me and you, Daniel, in London, the first time that we were going to like meet in person. And I thought, I'm just going to try and see if I can come up with anything. I had a couple of days in between some projects, so I thought, I'm just going to see what I can come up with. The first of those 2 days, I think most of the time I was just like staring at an empty screen, and like I hadn't really come up with much. And then like maybe an hour or 2 hours before I was going to give up and go home for the day, I just like came up with that, and I was like, that's something I could like. And then I just like put it out onto the strings. Like really bad samples. It sounds like a demo to me. It's like pretty bad for me, but
I can't tell. I honestly can't tell.
But yeah, I mean, it does this thing where like the viola plays a melody, and then the violin plays a melody a little bit higher up, the same sort of shape, but it's like delayed by a beat. So it kind of does this cool thing with the harmony in there. And then like I sort of held out cello and bass to like when that comes in, you like really feel it, and it makes it a bit more powerful, I think. And then like at the end, there's like just like a 3 or 4 second like pause in the music, and the music that I'd been listening to at the time definitely had tons of like pauses in it, and like that kind of like really sort of heightens the emotion of it. And then like that final chord in the last section is like a super sort of emotionally charged chord. So I think that couple of seconds of silence just as we like anticipate this like super emotional chord, I think that like makes it more effective. Yeah, no, I think I'm like pretty happy with that demo, and I'm like glad. I was like over the moon when I saw that it was actually going to work in the movie, like the first cut that I saw of the movie, and it was underneath the opening scene. I thought, oh wow, that's great, because like I've already written a bit of music, because I don't think I'd written any more music between that point and when I actually started, when I saw the first edit, and that was, maybe a year later or something. So, but at least that was a starting point for the rest of the movie. And like not all of the movie is in that style, but I think it. I was trying to sort of, like I was just hoping that I'd be able to write in that style, and luckily I was.
When you done the demo, did you write the demo and then you saw the footage from the film, and then did you have to do anything to the final version of that demo to make it work with the footage at all? Or
I like it fits itself quite well into there as it was, because I think Daniel, you just put it in into that first edit, and it worked pretty well. Maybe I don't know whether you cut the picture to the music or not, but I did change things around. I sped it up a little bit, and I need to add like a closing statement to the end of it as the sort of main titles come in. I think it allows people to sort of reflect upon like what the war sort of like did to their families. Like maybe they had relatives like grandparents who fought in it or were affected by it, and hopefully it kind of gives them an opportunity to understand it a little bit. Like just like you, John, your grandfather served in World War II. My grandfather did as well. He fought the whole time in North Africa and up I think the east coast of Italy.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
But I never really spoke to him about it while he was alive, and like now I just wish that I had. I wish I knew about it and what he went through.
It's interesting because I come to the film from a place of interest in that time of history, and I have, I guess, a loose relationship with it because my family are Holocaust survivors from Europe. But both of you um, have well, you come from an island that was under attack, and you both come from families that served. And I think the interesting thing is that I wonder if that plays a part in how you approach the making of something, not just the living of it. John, I mean, you both lived the film and made the film. It's kind of so you got two roles in it. Alex, you came to the film, but both of you have a background of being British, not just John as a historian and archaeologist, just being British. And one of the things that I learned throughout the making of this and other projects like it is, there's really not one person in England that didn't deal with the war because it was being bombed. So everyone, whether you had family fighting in the war or whether you had family helping on the civilian side or just going about their day trying to live their lives through those years, were directly affected by the war. I think that's something that a lot of the world doesn't know. I'm curious if you guys both felt that when you were making the film, or was it completely removed from, yeah, that's history, and then this is film? Obviously, John, for you, you were also telling a story about archaeology. What do you think, John?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think it's pretty rare to kind of have someone of our age, any age in England and Britain that didn't have a relative that served in the Second World War or the First World War, for that matter. And I think the great thing about the film, and I suppose the approach that I went with it, was that it was kind of an opportunity to tell that story, and the fact that Patrick was still alive with us. I say it in the film about me being a vessel to go to the wreck for him, but he was obviously that vessel to tell the story of all of his generation. And yeah, in the 40s, they were teenagers, 20-somethings that were, fighting a war. But now the ones that are left are people's granddads and great-granddads and stuff like that. And what I think is so important about what we did and about Patrick's story and the film and the project is that I really wanted to highlight the fact that this isn't ancient history. It's so close to now. My dad was born 8 years after VE Day, right? My grandmother, who's still alive, was 16, I believe, when the war ended. I mean, this isn't ancient history. And I think so often as a historian, I hear that quote about, if we don't learn from the past, then we'll repeat it. And I feel like people throw that around so much, but then so quickly do forget about the past and the lessons that have been learned. And I feel like, especially in the last few years, I know there was times making the film and immediately after the film where the whole time, and you were with me for the whole trip, Daniel, with this whole thing of, we have to do this to make people remember all the stuff that happened. And then, the last kind of, even the 2 years since we did it, it seems like, the world's kind of gone a bit mad and very quickly losing that memory of what happened in our kind of group consciousness. And so for me, it was so important to show people that this isn't history and that we all live the echoes of the Second World War every day, not physically, not mentally, but in our politics and in the way we live in our society. It all, that changed everything. And it's so important to not forget that and to remember it going forward.
Alex, did you have any personal reference to it? Did you think about your granddad or anybody else when you were making it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think he, or my sort of thoughts about him definitely influenced the music. I mean, his piano was the first piano that I ever played. So I don't think he was much of a musician. He played a little bit, but we eventually inherited that piano. That's still in my parents' house. That's the piano that I learned on. I kind of sort of tried to think about the time. I went back and listened to music from British composers who wrote it, who wrote music around that time. I think my favourite bit of music of all time, I think it's the most beautiful bit of music that's ever been written, is Vaughan Williams' Fifth Symphony. And that was, I looked it up, and that was actually released a year and a day before Patrick's boat was sunk. and it's an amazing bit of music, and that really inspired me. But then, you know, other composers, Holst, and you know, all of the other British composers from sort of the early 20th century. I mean, and yeah, Vaughan Williams actually fought in World War One. It's a really sort of serene bit of music, and I think that parts of the score kind of do have that sort of serenity in there, and that's quite important for me to try and capture just that sort of yeah, it's just a moment of reflection, I think, that we can all have watching this movie, and you know, about what happened then. I think it's really important.
You know, I really love that story Alex just told about his granddad's piano.
Yeah.
Because that's how he got into what he does, and the way I got into. Well, my first memory of kind of hearing about the war and history and stuff like that is my grandfather. Do you remember those little Airfix, styrofoam Spitfire planes you used to get out? Yeah. Well, my grandfather came over, and he was always a lot older than me. He was born in 1917. Obviously, I was born in 1991, so there's this huge gap between us. And we went over to the village green, and we were throwing this plane, and it landed on the ground and snapped, and the nose came off. And my grandmother said, "Oh, don't worry, Granddad can fix that because he fixed planes during the war." And I mean, I was so young, but I can still remember that vividly, and that kind of stuck with me. And then it was through him that I ended up doing, you know, getting into history and then archaeology through that. And when we started No Roses, it was only kind of 2 or 3 years after he'd actually passed away. And so for me, it was kind of, I almost feel like, I mean, it sounds silly to say, but I almost feel like No Roses is kind of like my delayed grief playing out over 90 minutes for my own grandfather, which is strange to think and to say, but I think it really is the case. And, you know, I was lucky to get that opportunity with Pat to make it up for not talking to my own grandfather about it. And my point is that, you know, Alex in his grandfather's piano, me with my grandfather, and I feel like everyone we got involved with the film, from kind of researchers to historians to composers to producers to divers to everyone, I feel like at some point they've either said it outright to us, or they've thought to themselves, you know, oh, you know, I remember my granddad or my great uncle, I've heard this story about my family. And I feel like people really, that kind of really echoes with people. And so that's why I feel like people have got involved with the film and so, you know, wanting to be a part of it, because it kind of, they can see themselves in it, you know.
Alex, I remember when you handed me that first piece, Adagio. So John, you probably don't know this, exclusive for you, but we had like maybe an hour for a coffee, because that's all the time I had before I had to hightail it to the airport. And we were getting along like a house on fire. And I actually didn't know what was about to happen. I was just like, right, we'll just talk about music and the logistics. And we were still in the middle of making the film, so I didn't really see a deadline in place. I was just like grateful to have Alex on board. And I thought, you know, hey, I'm in the UK. What a great opportunity to meet the guy, probably for the first and maybe only time in the making of the film. And as I'm getting ready to go, Alex, if you remember, he hands me this like USB key, and he's like, "Oh, yeah, by the way, you want to? I mean, you know, lots of caveats. This is by no means has to be this." And Alex is, I mean, if anyone's listening and wants to work with an amazing composer, Alex is the one, because you have this amazing persistent ability to get your music in there while constantly making everyone else feel like it's whatever they want. And you were like adamant, it could just be not remotely right. It's just something that came. Anyway, take a listen to it. So I took this USB key, and I remember I put it in my Mac as I was getting into a cab, and I transferred it over to my iPhone somehow. I was just like looking at the scene around my way to like the airport, Heathrow, and just be like, all right, I'm tired, I just want to get on a plane. And then it started playing. And I remember, like, usually I'm quite aware of my surroundings when I'm traveling. I just kind of, everything buzzed out. And I just kind of like played it over and over and over again until I realized I was at security and I had to take my iPod out. And, but I think it captured what you just said, both you and John. It sort of transported me in time. And one of the things I wanted to say about how I felt about that piece of music, and then maybe we'll play another one, but also the whole film's music. I feel like on the one hand, you've done a really good job of capturing that epicness of what a battle and a war is, plus history and memory being big epic sort of feelings, but also like you really managed to capture the humanity and the humor and the lightheartedness that Patrick is, which is, I think, something that John and I always talked about. That, John, you said something to me very early on in the making of the film. I don't want this to be some old man, half tilted over in a chair in a library, or at a veterans home telling a story, and then it's a bunch of talking heads and archival footage, right, John? I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah,
and I was like, and I was like, no, this is your adventure. It's like, there's this line in the movie which I love and I play endlessly, which is with you guys in the car, and you said, I feel like we're on a road trip, and Patrick just laughs. And I feel like the whole film, whether Patrick was with us all the time or not, is basically a road trip, ups and downs, good and bad, but it's a road trip. And I think, Alex, that's a bit of a challenge, because most movies that deal with like World War II or something like that are big, epic, constant, like, huge emotion. But in this film, there's humor, there's sadness, there's laughter, there's irony, there's, oh, that happened. There's all these moments. And I feel like that's a bit of a struggle to capture that in music and tone. I'm curious if John felt the same way when we were making the film, or when you saw it later, because I know you saw it when it was finished with the music already, so you didn't have the opportunity to see like without Alex's score. But I'm curious if you felt the same way, like, because it's not, when you watch something like, I'm trying to think of a documentary, but if you watch any World War II movie, it's all here, right, or like really sad. But this one's got like humorous guitar moments, and I don't know. What do you think, John?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I've watched it a few times now. Quite a few times actually, and I've watched it with a few family members and extended friends and stuff, and it's, I mean, once I've seen it once, I watch other people as they watch it, see their reactions, and you can see it's such a, there's not like a big moment, there's not like one big moment, there's not one really low moment, it's so up and down, and 1 minute you're laughing, the next minute you're crying, then you're laughing again, and then you're crying again. And that really is the essence of the story. And I think at the time we kind of knew that, even when it was going along, because at the end of the day, Patrick went through a horrendous thing, but that never kind of defined him, and he's still a normal bloke. And that's what I was so keen to put across, because every time I'd met these veterans or worked with these veterans, you see them in the suit and the medals and stuff, and you see them and they tell these stories and they cry and things like that. But then later on that night, you're in the pub with them, and they've had a few too many, and they're laughing their heads off and being young again. And that was so important to put that across with Pat. And I think the film nails that absolutely. It kind of feels like, I always think it's kind of like a coming of age film, except the guy coming of age is about 94. It's such a unique thing. And I suppose, Alex, that's a tough one to write for, because like Daniel said, normally a war film is just, full on.
Yeah.
You have to fit so many different styles, so many different genres of film, and so many different genres of music into one project, which must have been a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think writing music for Patrick was the thing that I got stuck with for the longest, because he's such a character. Like he's like completely radiant, and so energetic and funny, and that really comes through. And obviously, like, you've got to have the right sort of music so you don't bring it down, for one thing. And I think for the most part, I didn't really come up with end up like using a sort of a proper theme for Patrick. There's a couple of melodic ideas that come back here and there that but there's no sort of like full-fledged theme. I kind of split the movie into two separate styles. There's the orchestral stuff, which kind of is the reflection, and is the sort of music of the past when Patrick's heavily describing the past, or when you're describing the past. And then there's the music for you and Patrick's adventure together, searching for the ship. And that's more contemporary. It's got acoustic guitars and synths and stuff like that. And I think the sort of like the contrast between the two works pretty well. I mean, there's a little bit of overlap in some places, but I think that it helps to put the audience in the right mindset for that particular scene. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with how that came out in the end. Yeah.
What I really loved about it when I watched it, even from the first time I watched it, was, like you say, the orchestral music's kind of the old, the reference to the old historic part. And when you write the kind of music with the water and the diving and me and Patrick and stuff, that music feels clearly more modern than the orchestral stuff, and even it seems very up to date, even though it kind of fits the theme. And I really like that with the score, because it's such a clear jump in, as the film does, between the story of the past and the road trip now. And I think you really nailed that, spot on.
There's a moment, I think, Alex, you and I had our one sort of back and forth conversation, because pretty much for those that weren't there to watch this, the making of it, pretty much anything you sent, I think you were shocked that each time you were like waiting a couple of weeks, like, any notes, guys? And we're like, oh no, we just put in the edit. Sorry, do you want notes? And anyone that's worked with me will know that I always have notes. So it was I think it was, sometimes we felt like we were taking you for granted a bit, like we didn't have to actually handle you, because everything you gave us was just like dropping the film, like, oh, that works. But there were a couple of specific tracks I remember that you and I went back and forth over a lot. And when I work with music in particular, I always try and get a lot of people's opinions, because I'm very nervous that I'm pretty confident with almost everything else we do in film and television, but music and sound are always, sometimes a wardrobe, as you can tell, I'm not particularly up to style. And in music, my wife and partner would say the same. My music taste ranges pretty much from the 1500s to about roughly 1989. Sometimes I'll get the odd track. We listen to a lot of Oasis on the road.
I was going to say the 90s were great. Missed out.
But I don't have a very rich modern music vocabulary, and so I always ask other people's opinions. And so obviously everybody in the office, everybody working on the post-production of it, and it was interesting because a lot of people were saying, oh, we really like some of the more modern stuff that Alex has been including, and I think maybe we should just keep bringing down more of the orchestral stuff. And I don't know if you remember, Alex, our conversations back and forth over that. And then you wrote me something that felt very, like when they write your bio, that should be the quote. It was one of those moments where you're like, no, I really do feel like there is still a lot of room for big orchestral epic music. If it's just that people aren't used to listening to it anymore.
Yeah.
In front of the day films, you remember that?
Yeah. I think that. Well, I think I said to you that like people are often like a little too scared of just letting the music be music.
Yeah.
And like obviously the most important thing is serving the film, but there were a couple of moments where I was able to just let it go. And I wouldn't say it ever gets like sort of bombastic, but it gets pretty emotional in places. And I think that a lot of documentaries kind of try to steer away from leading the emotion, and I've tried to. I'm trying not to lead the emotion, because I think that's kind of a cheap trick, I suppose. You've got to be mindful that you're there to tell a story that actually happened, rather than a regular film that you're telling a story that maybe didn't happen. So you do have to be sort of careful, but like a lot of the time you do have to sort of, you're not allowed to, because just the film gets in the way of the music. And composers, we always like to think of ourselves as storytellers, but we are musicians first, and we want to make the best music and the most interesting music that we can. And sometimes the film does get in the way, but like there were a couple of moments where I really was able to just let loose, and I really like those moments of the film. But I like the moments where I did keep it reserved as well. But they're just one or two moments where it's like, and you get it when you write, and you don't like, it doesn't happen very often, and I don't think it happened to me for maybe 2 or 3 years, where I'd written a bit of music and like I played it back for the first time at the end of the day, and like I got like slight goosebumps. That doesn't normally happen for your own music, but then it happened I think twice on this film. It happened like when I was still studying music, when I first learned how to control someone's emotions. But yeah, it hadn't happened recently, and this is the first time in a few years that it had happened, and I was like, oh man, I've written some decent music that I think really works with the picture. I think the thing that I was surprised is that I was able to do that, and it works so well with the picture. I mean, I think in some cases the music is worse without the picture, and that doesn't happen to me very often as well. Normally the music can speak for itself, but I think just the sort of the character of Patrick and the sort of, and the story really does make the music better, which is interesting because normally it's the other way around. So
I have one more question, John, before I play another track. We've been talking a lot about this sort of excuse me. We've been talking a lot about this somewhat epic music and at times very emotional and even powerful, big music, orchestral wise. What did it feel like? I mean, you knew it was going to be scored, but obviously you'd never seen the film, and you knew we had Alex because you brought Alex to the table, but you really had no concept what music was going to be used and how it would be used. What did you think the first time you saw yourself in a movie, even though it's a documentary, yourself in the movie with such powerful, big music?
Yeah, it was funny because when we were making the film out in Normandy and all that, the kind of music never really crosses your mind because you're so busy trying to get the actual project going and get the film recorded and all that sort of thing. And yeah, I think like you said, Alex, it was between the two shoots where we started chatting about working together on it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I put it to you, Daniel, and then kind of left you two to it. And I knew it was going on, and I knew it was going to have some music on it, but I had no idea, anything about it. And then I remember it got to the point where, well, it wasn't too long ago when I saw the film for the first time, and I know there was a crossover point where I knew you'd done the first cut of the footage, and I could have watched the film then, but I knew it didn't have the music on. And at that point, I thought, well, I've waited this long, I might as well wait to have the full, impact. And yeah, I put it on, and it was surreal, really, because I mean, from the very first moment, I think people will hear that in the track we put up, or even when they see the film, it starts with that ship's bell or the gong or whatever it is. I think it's a ship's bell, and I love that because it's you have this feeling of, okay, this, we're going into this now, we're actually going into this adventure, and it kind of starts it all. And yeah, from that moment on, it just kind of blew me away. And it was a weird thing watching it the first time because I was reliving it all. And the funny thing about watching it for the first time was that it was so emotional for me to watch it because I was watching it as a viewer, and I was watching it as someone who was kind of reliving all of the stuff that went with that project and all the emotion with it. And there's some real heavy moments in that film, hugely heavy, that were really tough at the time, and they had a pretty long-lasting impact on me. So when I watched it all back again, I was just in floods of tears, really. And no doubt part of that's Alex's fault with the music.
Some of the times I had to stay out of the way because there were, I mean, as you said, there were some really powerful moments, and I sort of ummed and ahed whether I was even going to score some of those moments. And I think that there's one in particular where I was just like, no, I can't score this. Like, it needs to be just on its own.
Yeah, and I feel like they always say sometimes, it's better to kind of reel off a bit, and I think you're right, absolutely. The bits where there's less music or no music, that even has as big an impact because it's just so raw at that point, and those moments that people will see eventually when they see the film are so raw, which is why it's so real.
Yeah, Alex, I remember you and I talked a lot about decision making when it comes to placement of music, and I think a lot of people that haven't been through a process like this don't understand that the composer's job is, in my opinion, is just as much where not to put music as it is where to put music. And we could be really easily fooled in thinking, right, well, that's the music that was given, somebody gave direction, like, here's where I want music, here's where I want music. Obviously, for anyone who's never put a film together, I'm sure you could guess that, we usually put temporary tracks in or something just to guide the editor, and then the composer will either strip it out or try and get inspired of it. But I believe strongly that sometimes, where there's no music is a bigger decision. And Alex, you and I had a lot of conversations about, where to use no music almost as an instrument in the film, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think there's the most powerful tool that a composer can have is the is the tool of silence. Just like I said with that first bit of music, I had that 3 or 4 seconds worth of silence, and I feel like that improved what came after it by there being silence there. So there were moments where I just had to sort of, as much as I wanted to, because you always want to score those super emotional moments, but it just felt like a disservice because it was just happening right there on the screen. It didn't need anything else. And then you have this danger of tripping over yourself and making it less impactful.
I mean, just as a reference, both of you have seen 1917, right?
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, almost the entire film is silent. Like in terms of music, there's a lot of empty.
There is a ton of empty. I mean, I went and saw that as I was scoring. It was one of the few sort of evenings I had off while scoring this movie, because it came out and I'd been anticipating this movie for ages, because Thomas Newman's one of my absolute favorite composers, and so I was really and someone that I worked with went to a private screening with Thomas Newman and got to talk to him about the music, which is cool. And I heard all about that. But the music is definitely used sparingly in that. But then there are some moments where it just goes all out, and I think that's kind of what I tried to do with this. Use it fairly sparingly, but then when you're in there, make the most of it. That's my favorite score from the past couple of years, because
it's a good one.
It's a really great score.
Speaking of favorite score, I'm going to play. It's really awful for me to say that I have a favorite track, because I literally have been listening to the album a lot in the last few days. And for those that don't know, there's Alex, correct me if I'm wrong, there's a little bit more music on the album than there is in the film, right?
Give or take. I mean,
Yeah, so it's quite a hefty, good album, which we'll be releasing at some point. So I suggest that people keep track of that. But I'm going to play one of my favorite tracks, and then I really want to know what both of you guys think. So here's one called "A Peaceful Place," which will be dropped on YouTube after this. And here we go. That always gets me, that piece. That's crazy.
It's kind of, it's probably not that hard to hear, but the chords and the sort of shape of the melody are the same as that very first bit of music that I wrote. It's slightly adapted, but it's in there, and that's the sort of fun part about film scoring, is like hiding the themes in there, sometimes in sort of plain sight, but obviously because this isn't orchestral, or particularly orchestral with strings in there, but it's not so obvious. But having that sort of, this movie is about this ship, and that sort of main theme is kind of the ship's theme, I suppose. And the footage at this moment is so it's really emotionally powerful, but it's really serene at the same time. And the sort of the words that everyone's talking about as the pictures, it's hard to describe without giving away the movie, but yeah, it's just like I had to write something that reflected the emotion and the how calm and peaceful this particular scene was.
It's definitely one of my favorites. John, what did you think about this track?
Yeah, it's my favorite as well. I absolutely adore it. It's amazing. I was just, when we spoke about doing this chat, and I said, we should do that track because it's my favorite as well. In my head, that's the track that's over the scene where I'm diving the wreck. But then when I watched it back this morning, a bit of the film to see, and it isn't. And the funny thing about that is, I think that's because that music so perfectly encapsulates the feeling that I had when I was diving in the water and on that wreck. Like if you could kind of be inside my head while I was doing that, that's exactly what it sounded like. And so now I associate that music with actually diving on the wreck in Normandy, and I think that's quite telling. I love the fact that you can almost hear kind of an inquisitive tone to the song, almost like you can kind of hear the divers looking around corners and looking for any evidence that we can use to say whether it's the wreck or not. And, I mean, it just perfectly fits that moment. It's listening to it just now, it's kind of surreal because obviously this is the first time really we've done any sort of chatting about this film at all. So to talk about it for the first time since then, it's surreal because listening to it, I was thinking, I can't believe actually we have a film like that with a soundtrack that good. Not just to sit here and gush about Alex's work, but I mean, it is spectacular. It really is.
Yeah, I had this moment I was thinking where I remember the editing of this, and Alex, you talk about your struggles with soundtrack occasionally, and this was one of the hardest scenes. This and John's dive are one of the hardest scenes to edit because obviously for those that don't have a James Cameron budget, we don't have radio helmets underwater, right? So it's just, I don't know if John remembers, but I remember very, very acutely being on the top of this dinghy with you, suited up, all of us, and the dive team, and then, being thrown around by the ocean a bit. And then, all right, John, I'm trying to give him like last direction. He's trying to think about what he's going to do. And then, I'm over the side waiting for him with a camera at the bottom. And then for the next basically hour till we're back up, I can't talk to him and he can't talk to me, and everyone's in their own space. And what most people don't realize is that's also what all 5 or 6 cameras are recording at that time. So when you put it together in a film, when you're living it, because I was down there with you, John, and obviously I didn't have the same experience you did. I was also busy kind of trying to keep you in frame and all that stuff. But when you're going through it, it's very different than when you're looking at the footage, because when you're looking at the footage, you got 5 cameras or so you got like hours of footage, and most of it is just dark, blurry, whatever. And then occasionally there's a bit of Rec, bit of John, bit of my own flipper, and God bless the editor trying to put it together. It's really beautiful in the film, but the problem is with no music and no audio, all you've got is this basically all the time. And anyone who's done diving will know, John will recognize this immediately. This is basically an hour of footage. It's basically Darth Vader underwater. And that's really awful to edit to, because so we just basically turned all the audio tracks off. And now you've just got this silent 40 minutes worth of footage. So I have to say that I was really on edge. I was really nervous. I was actually nervous for John to see it too. I was really nervous about the editing of the underwater sequences because with no score, they were not just empty. They just felt raw and rough, and like you don't get the point, you don't see what I'm trying to say. It's just a bunch of footage. And then Alex's score came in, because like you said, it was one of the early ones. And Nick, our editor, threw it on, called me down to the basement, and it was still roughly edited. We hadn't gotten to where we want to get yet. And I was just like, oh, like John, like you were saying, like we're in that wow.
Yeah,
Cool.
exactly, yeah.
Sometimes there's moments as a director you're sitting in the edit suite because you've been through so much making it, you kind of know it all. There's no surprises, and that's the disappointing part. Because I think John made a good decision about watching it later. Because as somebody who's part of making it, as one of the producers, like if you're going to see it all the way through, you kind of have to see the light at the end of the tunnel. But sometimes I get to go in, especially music, especially in sound mixes, I get to go in and I'm like, oh, that's really good. Wait, we did this. This is pretty good, right? That track, I think, captures for me another part that you were talking about, Alex, which is the split personality of the music. Because anybody listening to that, and again, I hope I'm not offending, but to me, it reminds me sometimes a little bit of some of Brian Eno's music.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's kind of
John. You know what I'm talking about? Like it's a little bit like some of his more, from Train Spotting. There's those like slightly more surreal moments, and some of his lunar landscape music that he's done. And it's weird because you wouldn't think of that for a World War II film, right?
No, absolutely not. It's it's very, very far removed from what you would normally see in this sort of movie. But there is so much humanity and, present to this movie, because it's not just a historical movie. It's a story that literally happened, 3 years ago, whenever it was filmed. So it had to reflect, nowadays as well. There are moments throughout the film where there is no orchestra. There might be strings here and there, but where it's just strings and acoustic guitar. Like John's instrument is the acoustic guitar. That's what most of the time when John has a cue, that's going to be mostly acoustic guitar, because it would kind of feel weird to have a big lush string section for John, because I've known him for
Right.
Is this
nearly 15 years. So
is this some secret pact you had because John plays guitar?
Well, I mean, that may have gone into the influence of it, because I was like, oh, John plays guitar, like let's use guitar for John. That's just a lazy composer thing, like thinking that. But
I should have made a guest appearance.
You should have.
We better not find out that it's a specific guitar being used in the.
No, I just phoned him up and got him to play.
Is it that one right there? Is it that one right there next to you?
It's not that one. I'm not on the soundtrack, unfortunately.
Although I think if John ever gives a talk, he should bring a guitar and play that music.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not that good.
No, but it's interesting because you bring that up, and I was. We're not gonna. You'd have to wait for the album or the film to see this bit. But I was gonna ask both of you. One of my favorite moments you bring up the guitar is the end credits, right? And normally it's funny. I'm one of the few people that likes to sit through the whole movie in a theater till the lights come up, because I like the end credits. I don't even like just watching the end credits. And obviously there's that bit of like, oh, maybe there'll be something, John will put Patrick in the water at the end. But I like watching the end because I like the music and I like that last feeling the movie's leaving with me if I'm enjoying it. And I think that's something that composers get to play with, or if it's musicians for a song, then the end of the film is kind of there, like, here's me replaying your emotions for you while you wait to leave. And there's a moment at the end titles where you go from orchestral to almost entirely quiet, and then a very simple solo guitar plucking, right?
Yeah.
And again, if I had to pick favorite moments, I mean, the movie's over, right? But it's one of my favorite moments. And then it goes back to orchestral. What made you think of going that way?
The end credits are the bit where the composer can have fun, because there is no video to sort of, you got to worry about the timing, you got to worry about hitting this particular thing that the main character said. You can do whatever you want. So yeah, I mean, I'm the same. I always sit through the credits. I feel like it's a sign of respect for all these hardworking, especially the people right down at the end of the list. They get to have their names seen by people as well. Plus, as I said, that's where the best score tends to be. So for this moment, I've written my favourite theme in the whole movie is Jack Barringer's theme. And Jack, as some people might know, is one of Patrick's fallen shipmates. And it was towards the end when I actually wrote this this bit of music. It was maybe it was like just over halfway through when I wrote this bit of music, and it comes through a couple of times in the movie, but it kind of reflects Patrick's friendship with Jack, and then in sort of extension, the rest of the fallen shipmates. And I loved that bit of music so much that I was like, I want to put it at the end and see how that is. So initially I put the full version there, and it kind of worked, but it didn't feel quite right. The very end of the movie is one of the most, it's such a powerful ending that you do have to sit there in silence for a second to reflect. So for just a couple of seconds, you get some strings come in, and then there's this solo guitar. And I think that does allow the audience to sort of reflect on what's just happened and reflect about their own family's experiences and with wartime. So and then because the acoustic guitar is the modern sound of the score, I feel like it sort of tied the whole movie and the score in together pretty well. So yeah, I mean, I think it works pretty well. Yeah.
John, when you got to the end of the film the first time, obviously there's a lot going on in your mind, I assume, the first time. I remember the first text you sent me. I was sitting on kind of pins and needles waiting for John to either like absolutely hate everything I had done with the film or be like, yeah, it's all right, you know, or hopefully he'd be like, yeah, it's good. But he was like, I'm sitting here crying. I was like, and I know a lot of it was also just your own personal journey in the film, but I feel like some of it's a bit of the music, because I don't know, the end is really powerful. I'm curious what you thought, John, about that, all the way through the credits.
No, absolutely. I mean, I remember I just sat there kind of speechless from the whole experience, and everyone that I've watched it with, there's always this moment that I haven't known anyone I've watched it with that's spoken over the credits or got up and gone for a drink or anything like that. Everyone always seems to sit there right until the file that we watch it on runs out, and every single person has always been like, no one knows what to say at the end of the film. And I feel like the music, like you say, Alex, it gives people a chance to reflect on it and to reflect on their own relation to that story, which no doubt, you know, almost everyone that will watch it will see something of themselves in that story. And the music at the end of the credits is the perfect, you know, moment for that, and the perfect instigator for people to feel that way, I suppose.
John, you've heard the whole track, right? Not just in the movie. You've got the whole album, right?
Yeah.
Is there a particular piece? I mean, you already mentioned the Peaceful Face is your favorite. It's funny, it's mine too. And I've mentioned this particular junction in the credits. I'll throw out one more, which of course we can't reference in the film until you see it, but I do remember one piece of music that I really liked also, which was at the graveyard with you and Patrick at Jack Barringer's grave. It's just a small piece of music that I really, really, really like until you two start talking. So again, people have to wait to watch the film to get that full experience. But I'm curious if you have another favorite that you remember from the music.
Yeah, I really like. This might even be my favorite. I'm not sure, but the track over my actual dive. I suppose. I mean, it's probably a personal thing because I relate that to me, to dive in it, and it's pretty surreal to have your own soundtrack, or you know, it's pretty weird. But I feel like someone should play that whenever I walk into a room from now on. It's like John's.
The part with the drums, the triumphant part at the end.
You know, or the bell right at the start. Just But no, I love the music that goes over my dive because, as we keep saying, you know, wait and see the film. But there's a really emotional moment where I'm diving along, and then it cuts so well to me talking about how I felt during the whole thing. And that must be the bit I've watched, you know, again and again. And if it ends, I'll go back and watch it. Or if I've watched it with someone else and I've been watching their reaction, I'll then go and watch it again at the end, because I just love the way it really, it lets the moment breathe, and it lets me breathe to talk about how I felt and the whole thing I say about the wreck, which people will have to find out. But yeah, that's definitely a favourite, if not my favourite, actually.
Alex, do you have a favourite?
Yeah, I really like the bit in. Yeah, well, yeah, yeah, I really like the bit with Patrick and John in the graveyard. I think that's Jack Barringer's theme. So, I think it's, yeah, I think it hits the spot. So, and then the very final bit of music of like while the actual film, just before the end credits, it's this sort of 5.5 bit of music, minute bit of music, and it kind of goes through all of the themes, and it has this really great moment between Patrick and John, and I think that it just sort of, it rounds out the movie so well. So
yeah. John, do you have any other questions for Alex? I mean, I feel like we can go on for hours about this.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk about music all day, but no, I don't think so. I mean, it's been really interesting for me because, you know, I had no idea of the process, and I didn't know that I had a theme. I didn't know I had an instrument in the film, so that's news to me. Really interesting, and yeah, no, it's just great. I mean, I would watch something like this about another film, so it's been nice to be in it, you know, and talk to Alex about what he did.
Yeah, I think also it's should be said here, unless Alex, you ask me to cut it out later. But Alex's services are usually unaffordable to a documentary like No Roses on a Sailor's Grave. And the type of music that was produced for us is way beyond, much like many things that went into this film, through both people's emotional connection and generosity. And I know that some of that was kickstarted by the fact that you had a relationship with John and you felt connected. But I also I want to take a personal opportunity to thank you, because, and I know I did it in emails and you were like, oh, that's some of the nicest stuff people have ever said. I have a email from you that says, that's some of the nicest stuff anybody's ever said about my music. And I'm like, who's employing you? Like, you write great music. But no, the film it's half a film without your music. It's just not even close. I've seen it many, many times without music. I've seen it with temporary music. Some of the best music I love in my personal life that I've brought to it as temporary tracks just to get me through the editing. You know, tracks by composers that, you know, are, you know, one could dream to work with, some are no longer with us. But it's really not the same until you put your track on it and your music on it. And I think I can feel sort of all that energy that you poured into it. And I think if anyone is lucky to have that, big budget or little budget with you, Alex, then, I mean, you know, I think you mentioned the first time that when we talked about releasing the album, you were like, yeah, I think for the first time I feel comfortable releasing like an album, right? Like
yeah.
So maybe briefly, let's just tease the release of the album and then we'll wrap it up. But like, we are going to be releasing the full score, and it is, I think, 17 tracks, right? 17 tracks?
Yeah, give or take, yeah. There's some tracks consolidated into one, some cut out from the actual movie, some slightly edited just to make them more appropriate. Now there isn't people talking over it, or but yeah, it's I think it's the best score that I've ever written, and I think that is mostly because of the story. It's such a compelling story, and Pat and John's relationship is such a great feel-good relationship that it made it easy. I mean, it wasn't that easy because I worked so hard, but like it every single day when I came back to, I was working until like 2, 3 a.m. most days, especially in the last 3 weeks before it had to be all finished by. And I was back at the studio at 8 a.m. But like every day, I was really excited to get back to it, because it was a compelling story, and it was fun to write it.
That says a lot that you think it's some of the best music you've written, because I know some of the other music you've written and for some of the other shows you've written, and they're not small. So that says a lot to me.
Yeah, it's just like it's a whole collection of just some like hopefully I think other people will think so too. But I think it is like listen to the score, but watch it with the movie because it is better with the movie as well.
Very cool. Any other final thoughts, the two of you?
No, I was just, as Alex was talking, I was just thinking about how I watch a lot of documentaries, and I'm not sure I've ever watched one where afterwards I would go and listen to the soundtrack. So I think it's kind of, I mean, unique and special in a way that we have a documentary that feels like kind of a Hollywood war film, and yet it's all real. It all happened. You know, we all did it on a shoestring. We all came together, and it was all done out of love and passion. And yeah, we're lucky. We're lucky to have the music, and we're lucky that it all worked out. Really, it's a spectacular soundtrack, and completes what I think is a spectacular film. So.
Yeah, it was definitely the icing on the cake at the end of it was to see the journey capped with such a great soundtrack, Alex. So again, thank you. And then to wrap this up, so we'll be dropping the 2 tracks that we just talked about, A Peaceful Place and also the Adagio, or the opening, but in the final version that's actually in the film will be on YouTube. So check out Go Button Media's YouTube and John's Instagram, which is Battlefield Archaeologist. We'll also put some of the information attached to the file, and then look out for the dropping of the full album soon, which I personally listen to all the time, even when I'm working on other projects and just writing and just doing stuff. It just fits so beautifully with everything else, and the film will be out as well, and hopefully playing at a screen near you soon. I want to thank John for doing this.
My pleasure.
Yeah, and Alex, I want to thank you for taking time to talk to us about it and for sharing the behind the scenes experience, because I know you said you're one that usually lets your music talk.
Yeah, it's a strange phenomenon. Just like working on my own, not speaking with my headphones on. But it's nice to talk about the process. And I'm really excited for everyone to see the movie. So.
Beautiful. Well, the music is stunning. Thank you again.